Welcome to this deep dive. It's tailored just for you, and we're going deep with Aristotle.
Sounds exciting.
It seems like you're ready to go beyond Aristotle as just a name, a historical figure.
Absolutely.
We're going to explore if his ideas, even though he lived so long ago, still have weight in today's world.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is really dissect key excerpts and arguments from this fascinating text on Aristotle's life and work.
And it's a fascinating life.
Right. And the source material dives right into the fact that this was not just any philosopher. This was the guy who taught Alexander the Great.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine being his tutor? Talk about pressure.
Yeah, the pressure to form the young mind that would then go on to conquer all those places.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to why Aristotle's work has resonated throughout history.
Oh.
He wasn't some philosopher cloistered away in some academy. He lived during a period of immense change and upheaval, in Greece. But he was able to connect his ideas to the very real world around him, to, as we've said, to people in power, to the issues of his day.
And that's, I think, what makes his work feel so immediate, right? It's not just something, again, from a dusty textbook.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, wait a minute. This guy was dealing with stuff that is still relevant today.
Right.
And it's fascinating to me that, obviously he's considered foundational to so many fields.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all just theoretical to him.
Precisely. This was an ivory tower philosophy. And this emphasis on observation, on grounding your ideas in reality, that feels incredibly relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in our world of influencers and just endless streams of information coming at us.
It's overwhelming.
It is. And Aristotle was all about cutting through the noise and carefully examining the world around you.
Yeah. It's like he's giving us permission to be more discerning, more skeptical, to question, to not simply accept what we're told.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we're establishing that Aristotle was, to use the technical term, a big deal.
Right.
But his actual work, I'm not going to lie, I was flipping through the source material, and it's dense.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious, for someone today, like approaching his ideas today, where do we even begin?
You're right. His work can feel daunting at first.
Yeah.
But don't worry, that's what we're here for,
Well,
right?
exactly.
To break it down. Perhaps the best way to start is with one of his most fundamental concepts, the idea of form and matter. You encounter it every single day without even realizing it.
Form and matter. Okay.
Yeah.
Form and matter. Okay, that sounds very philosophical and abstract to me. I have to admit, that's the kind of thing that always made my eyes glaze over a little in school.
Yeah.
How would you explain this to someone who hasn't, cracked open an Aristotle text in a while?
Well, it's actually very straightforward. It's about how things exist in the world.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Picture your coffee mug.
Okay.
Right there, you have Aristotle's big idea in action.
Wait, my coffee mug, seriously?
Absolutely. The mug itself, the physical material it's made of, that's the matter.
Okay.
Could be ceramic, could be glass, whatever.
Right.
But the form is what makes it a mug. The shape, the purpose, the fact that it can hold your coffee.
Okay.
Form and matter are inseparable.
I see.
And together, they make up every object you see around you.
Wow. I never thought about it like that. But it's so simple and makes total sense. It's like he's taking something we take for granted, like, oh, there's a coffee mug.
Exactly.
And he's revealing this hidden structure to reality.
Exactly. And this reflects Aristotle's approach to knowledge. He believed in grounding even the most complex ideas in observations of the world around us.
Okay, so it's all about starting with what we can observe, what we can experience.
Exactly. Speaking of connecting things, let's move to another one of his famous concepts, the syllogism.
Okay.
It might sound intimidating, but I bet you use them all the time without even realizing it.
Okay, I have to admit, syllogism, that is a word that makes me think of, like, logic textbooks, Give me the plain language version.
It's basically a structured way of reasoning.
Okay.
You've heard the classic example, right? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
Right, though I have to admit, that one always felt a bit obvious. Like, okay, yeah, of course.
It's the structure that's important.
Okay.
It's about taking two true statements, your premises, and using them to reach a new, logically sound conclusion.
Gotcha.
Let's make it a bit more relatable. Say, all cats love catnip. Mittens is a cat, therefore.
Mittens loves catnip. Okay, I see. It's like a mini equation for reasoning.
Exactly. You just used a syllogism. Aristotle believed this kind of clear, structured thinking was essential for everything, from philosophical debate to just making everyday decisions.
So in a way, he was giving us a tool To think more critically, to make sure our arguments were, watertight.
Precisely. And in today's world, where we're just bombarded with information from all sides, being able to break down an argument, to spot fallacies, to see if the conclusions people draw actually follow from their premises, well, that's more crucial than ever, wouldn't you say?
It really is. Knowing how to think critically is like a superpower these days.
Right.
So we've got form and matter, we've got syllogisms. What else is in Aristotle's toolbox for understanding the world?
Well, this next concept is a big one. It's his idea of virtue ethics.
Ethics. Does that mean we're about to get a lecture on how to be better people?
Not a lecture, more like a framework for thinking about it.
Okay.
Aristotle wasn't about rigid rules or commandments.
Okay.
He believed that living a good life, a life of what he called eudaimonia, meaning flourishing or fulfillment, was about cultivating virtuous character traits.
So instead of saying don't lie, it's more about striving to become an honest person.
Exactly.
Okay.
He even used the analogy of a craftsman honing their skills. Think about something you're trying to get better at right now.
Well, I'm learning this new programming language, and it's definitely a process of consistent effort, practice, and, sometimes a bit of frustration.
There you go. It's the same with virtue. You become courageous by acting courageously. You become generous by practicing generosity.
It's interesting to think of it that way, like you're building up your character over time, almost like leveling up a skill tree in a game.
Okay, I'm liking Aristotle's approach to self-improvement here. What else should we know about how he viewed this path to a virtuous life? This idea of virtue as a practice, a skill to be honed, it's really resonating with me. But it makes me wonder, how does this all connect to Aristotle's idea of the golden mean? I have to admit, I always thought it just meant moderation in all things.
Right, it's a common misconception. The golden mean is more nuanced than simply, everything in moderation.
Okay.
It's about finding the right amount of something for you for that specific situation. It's about balance, yes, but a balance that's guided by reason and virtue. So it's not about always taking the middle road, but rather finding the appropriate action, the appropriate response.
Exactly. Let's take courage, for example. Too little courage, and you fall into cowardice.
Right.
Too much, and you become reckless.
Oh, I see.
The golden mean would be about finding that sweet spot, that courageous action that's appropriate to the situation, guided by reason and a virtuous aim.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about understanding the context, the context of a situation, and responding in a way that aligns with your values and goals. It's like he's giving us this framework for navigating all the complexities of life, even in the face of uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've been exploring these key Aristotelian concepts,
You're-
but I imagine he wasn't just formulating these ideas in a vacuum, right?
Right.
He was part of a larger philosophical conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
Who was he responding to?
Yeah, Aristotle was deeply engaged with the ideas of his time, and he often found himself disagreeing with some very prominent thinkers. Perhaps the most significant of these was his own teacher, Plato.
Oh, wow.
Imagine challenging the ideas of the very person that you learned from.
Talk about a fascinating dynamic.
Right.
What were some of the core disagreements they had?
It gets pretty complex.
Okay.
But in essence, Plato believed in these perfect, unchanging entities called forms that existed outside of our physical reality. Imagine, for example, the perfect form of a chair.
Okay.
According to Plato, this perfect form of a chair exists in this other realm, and every chair that we see in the world is just an imperfect copy of that.
Okay, so Plato's focused on this more abstract, ideal realm.
Right.
Whereas we know Aristotle was all about observing, understanding the concrete world around us.
Exactly, and that's a key difference. Aristotle felt that Plato's forms were too disconnected from how we actually experience and understand things. For Aristotle, the chair itself, its physical properties, its purpose, its form, they're all intertwined and inseparable.
It's a debate that still resonates today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Is there one right way of doing something, like a perfect blueprint?
Right.
Or does it depend on the context, the specific situation?
Right.
It's fascinating how these ancient philosophical debates still find echoes in our modern lives.
They absolutely do. And speaking of debates that feel incredibly relevant today, Aristotle also had some strong words for the sophists.
Okay.
This was a group of teachers who were all about the art of persuasion, often at the expense of truth.
Oh, that sounds eerily familiar in our age of misinformation and spin.
Right.
Tell me more. Who were the sophists and why did Aristotle disagree with them so strongly?
So the sophists, they were masters of rhetoric. They were less concerned with truth and more about winning arguments, even if it meant, manipulating facts, appealing to emotions. They were essentially the spin doctors of their day.
I can definitely see the parallels to our current media landscape.
Exactly, and this is where Aristotle pushed back. He believed that truth mattered, facts mattered. For him, persuasion was only valuable if it was grounded in sound reasoning and evidence. You couldn't just be convincing, your arguments had to be based on something solid.
He was fighting against fake news centuries before the internet.
Mm.
It really highlights the timelessness of his ideas. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from his concept of form and matter to the importance of virtue, from his disagreements with Plato to his critiques of the sophists. It makes me wonder, what would Aristotle make of our modern world? Imagine him like scrolling through Twitter, encountering our 24/7 news cycle, or trying to navigate the complexities of online discourse. What would he think?
It's a fascinating thought experiment. On the one hand, I think he'd be astonished by the sheer volume of information available to us. He was a firm believer in lifelong learning and seeking knowledge, so I imagine he'd be fascinated by the access we have to vast libraries and resources at our fingertips.
It's like the ultimate library of Alexandria, right in your pocket.
Ex-
But at the same time, wouldn't he be overwhelmed by the noise, the constant stream of information, and the lack of emphasis on truth and reason that we see in some corners of the online world?
Precisely. Remember, Aristotle valued reasoned discourse. He'd likely be dismayed by the prevalence of echo chambers and the tendency to prioritize, emotional arguments over logical reasoning. I imagine he'd be urging us to apply his principles of logic, critical thinking, to the information we encounter online.
Instead of just hitting that retweet button, he'd want us to pause, analyze the argument, see if it holds up to scrutiny. It's like he'd be encouraging us to become more discerning digital citizens.
Absolutely. And I think his concept of the golden mean would be particularly relevant here. In a world of extremes where people tend to gravitate toward the loudest and most polarizing voices, he'd be reminding us of the importance of balance, nuance, seeking the middle ground.
It's about finding that space for thoughtful reflection and measured discourse, even in the midst of all the digital noise. This entire deep dive has been so eye-opening. It's incredible how relevant Aristotle's ideas feel, even centuries after he was writing.
It really speaks to the enduring power of his insights. He provided us with tools for understanding not just the world around us, but also ourselves and our place in it.
And it seems like there's always more to unpack, more to explore within his work.
Oh, absolutely.
He definitely left us with a lot to think about.
He did.
Our source material briefly touched on something called Aristotle's four causes. Have you heard of this concept?
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating aspect of his philosophy, exploring the different ways we can understand the cause of something, the why behind the what. But that, my friend, is a conversation for another deep dive.
Indeed it is. And it seems like Aristotle's ideas will provide endless material for future explorations. For now, we'll leave our listeners with that thought. This has been an illuminating deep dive into the world of Aristotle. Thank you for joining us as we plumb the depths of his enduring wisdom. Until next time.